Are you a woman of faith in business who is aspiring to start a podcast, or maybe you have a podcast and you want to rebrand or relaunch your podcast? I have good news for you. Announcing and introducing She Elevates Media. She Elevates Media is a collective and a collaboration project and your marketing team to launch your podcast. We will assist you from beginning to end in launching your God-given message in the marketplace in the form of a podcast. We help you plan the podcast, we help you publish and produce the podcast, and we also help you promote the podcast. So this is something that is new to the marketplace, and I am one of the individuals as a part of the collective of your marketing team. So I encourage you to go to sheelevatesmedia.com to learn more about how we can partner with you to launch your podcast, to rebrand your podcast, or to relaunch your podcast as we walk you through the path to profiting in your podcast, where we plan, we publish, we produce, and we promote your podcast. Learn more at sheelevatesmedia.com. Welcome to the Women Faith Plus Business Podcast. I'm your host, Nadine Mullings. I'm an author, speaker, and podcast host, and I believe in the importance of women of faith stepping up, shining in their lane, and sharing their God-given message so they can have the impact, income, and influence they were born to make. Join me this season to discover how women of faith in business are using podcasts as their platform to share their mission-driven message. And be sure to join the Women Faith Plus Business community by going to NadineMullings.com/community. That's NadineMullings.com/community. See you in the powerful community of women of faith in business, and enjoy this episode of the Women Faith Plus Business Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Women Faith Plus Business Podcast. I know I say this every single episode, and it is so true, every single episode, but I am super excited to have the next guest that I have with me today, Lissa Figgins. Lissa Figgins is the host of the Redeem Her Time podcast. But not only that, I consider her a friend, a coach, a colleague, and we have known each other for several years now. We actually met in the internet streets. I believe it was LinkedIn initially that we connected, had a one-on-one conversation, and Lissa has been pouring into me ever since. I'm currently in her coaching program, and I listen to her podcast all the time. So that's why I'm really excited to have this conversation with her today, to talk a little bit more about her platform and her podcast. So welcome to the Women Faith Plus Business Podcast, Lissa.
Thank you, Nadine. I love getting to hang out with you. So I know this is going to be a great conversation and time well spent, right? Speaking of time.
Definitely. Time well spent. So I know all about you, but not all of the listeners know all about you. So I'm going to share a little bit about you. A recovering busyness owner, Lissa unhurried her heart, finally letting go of her addiction of controlling time, multitasking, and always doing. How many of us can relate to that always doing, right? Her God-given mission as an on-time management strategist, host of the Redeem Her Time podcast, and creator of the Redeem Her Time planner is helping Christian women business owners resign from trying to be better managers of their time. Instead, she teaches her clients to steward their time as a gift from God and build the essential CEO schedules, systems, and strategies to increase their ROTI, which is return on time invested, for the glory of God. Lissa loves walking and talking, traveling and planning, reading and leading, plus lots of dark coffee, plus dark chocolate. And most importantly, she speaks the truth. You have time. So, welcome officially to the podcast, Lissa. I always love reading your bio and learning more about the amazing work that you do. Because, as I said, I actually have the privilege of working with Lissa, so I experience it firsthand.
Well, I love that you call this women faith plus business because that is exactly what Redeem Her Time is. It is faith plus business put together because, like you and I were saying before we hit record, I don't know how people separate the two and do them on their own or why you would want to, right? When we have access to the God who holds everything in his hands. And I always
Mhm.
end my podcast with saying, stop chasing a clock, trying to control it, and receive the gift of time from the one who truly holds it. Because as his
Yes.
daughter, you have time. So I love that you're putting faith and business together because it's not a, success principle in, X plus Y equals Z, but it is a biblical principle in when we partner with God in our business, our fruitfulness is inevitable, right?
Exactly. And it brings up the visual that we have in your planner. So not only does she have an amazing podcast, that she has an awesome planner, Redeem Her Time planner that I personally have. It has become my favorite planner. And a
Aw.
part of the planner, faith is at the center, right? So we all have different elements of our life and different parts of our lives. And sometimes we're taught or we visualize faith being a piece of the pie, but Lissa really teaches that faith is the center of the pie. So everything else, family, friends, all the other good stuff, is the outward part of the wheel, but faith is always at the center. So it definitely reminded me of faith being at the center, which is also what your podcast is all about. So your podcast is faith-centered truth and tools for busy midlife women entrepreneurs to break free from busyness and create work-life balance, productivity planning. Awesome. Love it. Love it. So tell us, Lissa. So, how long, number one, have you had the podcast and what inspired you to start the podcast?
Well, it's kind of a funny story, and this is going to be really fun to go back there in my mind because I literally stumbled on podcasting and
Mm,
really launched it not knowing anything at all. I did not spend a whole lot of time to like research and, figure out all the tools I needed. I just jumped in.
okay.
So what happened was I was doing these weekly interviews on my Facebook page, and I
Mm,
would record them each week, right? I'd been doing them for, I don't know, probably 6 months to a year. And I
mhm,
had a conversation with someone one day, and she's like, you could just turn that into a podcast. And I was like,
mhm.
how do you do that? And she like really quickly shared her screen, literally took like 5 minutes. And I was like, oh, I could do that. I guess I have a podcast now. And, so that was really how I stumbled upon it. So my first official episode that was not just the Facebook Live re-recorded,
Mhm.
was actually in, well, let's see, let me think. I remember, it's so funny. I remember the day because we got this huge snowstorm. I was interviewing a good dear friend of mine who's a Christian woman business leader that I really respected. And my husband got stuck out at the end of our driveway because they don't plow where we live. And I remember being like, I've got to do this interview in a couple of minutes. And I'm trudging out there in my boots to like go help get him out of the snowbank and then come in here and do this. So I want to say it was like February, I think, of 2020. It was prior
Okay.
to like the 2020 date that we all know, right?
Yep.
So who knew that that was what was about to happen? But yeah, and it's actually started. It was not Redeem Her Time. It was
Mm,
repurposed after 40. And the
mm,
focus was interviewing these amazing women in business
mhm,
who had had some kind of struggle, had some kind of journey, some kind of maybe crisis or whatever. And like in this season of midlife, like God had like repurposed what it was that they had gone through. And now they were using that to, really bless and benefit others. And so it was really just a series of interviews where I just started having conversations with women around, yeah, what was their journey? What was kind of that crisis moment, that turning point, and then how was God using what they had been through in this new season of their life and things like that. And so, yeah, so that's how it started.
mhm,
And then I was really kind of looking into developing my own program for coaching. And
mm,
so I thought it was going to be called Simplified Focus. I did a whole summer series on how to simplify things in your life. And we got real tangible. Like, how do you simplify your home? And when you simplify your home, it actually also simplifies your heart. Crazy how it's a
mm.
reflection of the same, right? Anyway, long
Absolutely.
story short, it was simplified focus for about 6 months until God said, nope, it's going to be called something else. And I didn't know what it was going to be called yet. And all of that. I took a week to really fast and pray. And it was
Mm,
during that week that my pastor was preaching from Ephesians. He used
mhm,
the word redeem. I knew I was supposed to be talking around things around time because busyness and time were the biggest struggles I was hearing. And all of
Yeah.
a sudden, it clicked in my head and was born in the back of the bulletin that Sunday, redeem her time. I remember writing it out. I remember going to Ephesians 5:15 through 16. Look carefully how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, redeeming the time because these are difficult days, right? So anyway, so that would have been the November of 2022 is kind of when that shift happened. And anyone who was listening prior to that just got to kind of go on my journey from repurposed after 40 to simplified focus to redeem her time. And now I know that I know that I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is the name. It's not changing. It's trademarked. It's legal. It's official. Right.
Awesome.
And it
Yeah.
totally encapsulates what it is that the message is that God's given me. So anyway, that's
Yeah.
kind of the long version or short version of the long story of like how I stumbled into podcasting. I did right before I went live with that first episode I was telling you about, I did find a course that was like how to launch your podcast in 30 days. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
very much a paint by numbers girl. You tell me step by step what to do, and I will check every box and do it
Yeah.
just like you tell me to. And so that's what I did. I never talked to the person who ran the course. I never went to their
Mm.
support, calls. I just checked the boxes of their little mini course. And here I am. I'm still using the same platform. I'm still using some of the, the same techniques and
Mhm.
stuff that I was. I have a new microphone now, but other than
Yeah.
that, like, yeah, everything is just what I figured out in that 30 days.
Yeah, I love that. There's so many key things about your journey that I want to point out. The first part is that, sometimes we have people that fall in two different buckets. The bucket of they're an avid listener of podcasts. They always thought about starting their own podcast. They thought many, many years before they started it. And
Yeah,
then you have people
I
that
was not a podcast listener prior to starting one at all. Like didn't even know what it was type of person. So yeah.
exactly. And then we have the bucket that you're in is the bucket where you kind of stumbled into it, didn't even listen to a podcast, didn't know what podcasting was, but a person showed you, hey, you have these interviews on Facebook. Why not repurpose it? And we're all about repurposing. Repurpose it and start a podcast. And she showed you how to do it, and bam, a podcast was birthed. So I love that your journey started in bucket number two, like stumbling into the podcast, industry and starting that way. So I love that part of your journey. And then I also love the part of your journey of the evolution, right? Sometimes we
Mm.
think like when we kick something off and we start something, it's going to be that way forever. But the reality, whether it's a business, whether it's a podcast, is it evolves over time. God reveals step by step what needs to happen. So I love that you shared the evolution of how it started. And I love that you shared that it started in February 2020, because believe it or not, that year, 2020, on this podcast, I've heard so many people talk about something happening in 2020 that shifted things for them, right? That
Yeah.
they started something, something happened. That year was the year of shifting, I
It
believe.
was our pivot year, right? As they say.
It was the pivot year, and so many things were birthed in 2020. So it's not surprising that your podcast was birthed in 2020. So I love that part of your story too. The other part of your story that I want to just highlight for the audience is the name being dropped in your spirit. That's something that also comes up a lot of times too. A lot of times people have a name of a book, the name of a podcast, the name of a program. Like they don't fully know what it means or understand, but God drops the word or the phrase in their spirit, and something convicts them to their soul that this
Mhm.
is what they need to run with. This needs to be the program. This needs to be the book. This needs to be the podcast, but not fully flushing out what that fully means or embodying it yet. So it's a part of the journey embodying it. It took time for you to learn how to redeem your time, right? But that it resonated with you so much that God put that in your spirit. So I love that was a part of your journey too. So I wanted to highlight some of those key things that you mentioned for the audience. So now you launched this podcast, and it's now Redeem Her Time. Was there a vision? You said, okay, he dropped this in my spirit. I knew that I wanted to help women with productivity. Was there a vision that you wanted the podcast to reach a certain amount of people, or what was the whole vision behind the podcast once you got to Redeem Her Time?
Yeah. Well, I love this. I would say the vision was much more the impact it was going to have versus the numbers, although the numbers are a way to measure the impact. So, I
Yeah.
do love that. But when I think about like, I know, like I can specifically place myself in certain places when I heard a podcaster say a specific thing that I needed to hear. There's something about having someone in your ears that you
Yep.
feel like you're building a relationship with them. It's not just this quick, I'm scrolling past, I happen to like your image. So maybe I read a couple lines of copy that you wrote and click a little heart and then move on to the next thing. And especially when you're coming back week after week, there's this like relationship that gets built. There's this like knowing and being known, right? And all of that. And so I think that's really my vision is that people would feel about my podcast the way that I feel about the very few that I follow. I used to follow a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them, and let's be honest, like I would always have something in my ear if somebody wasn't
Mm-hmm.
around or I wasn't doing like what I call my CEO work. Because
Yeah,
otherwise, how do you get to them all, right? But it was like I didn't ever have
exactly.
the quiet and I never took the time to really implement everything they were saying. So I finally had to like really pull back and go, who are my top two or three?
Yep.
And unfollow the others for now. And that's okay. I still go in there and watch a random episode because I got an email or I saw a post or something like that, right? But so anyway, I think my biggest vision is just the impact because the work that I do is not just it's not just time management, right? You know this firsthand. There's a lot of productivity, time management experts out there that just say you just need to get more organized and you're better with your time here, time block your day and organize your task list and all of that. Like it wasn't just a how to, it's
Yep.
really well, it is a how to. It's how to think differently about your time. It's how to think biblically
Mm-hmm.
about your time. It's how to unmanage your time. In fact, steward it. So I knew a quick post wasn't going to do that kind of deeper work. It was going to have to be this ongoing conversation. One thing
Yeah.
I do that actually I think is unique, and this is part of my vision, is I have a free community. It is not on
Mm-hmm.
social because as a time strategist, I know that's the number one time drain for so many people is social. And this is not this is not me putting down anyone who's using it, but I knew I had to create my community off of social on a separate platform. So
Yeah.
what I do is we have a podcast episode and then we continue the conversation over inside the community.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how beneficial that's been for my listeners because it's not just like, oh, that was a great thing to hear. And now I'm on to the next thing. Like we're actually doing stuff with what we learned. And when
Mm-hmm.
I bring on a guest, they're very honored. They're actually very surprised that I'm bringing them in as like my resident expert for like the 3 days or so around their episode to really highlight them and let them continue to share their expertise, their knowledge, their things like that, because I want this to be this community. I don't just want it to be it's not just like a book that you put on your earbuds and while you're mopping the floor and that was a great, thing. So anyway, those two combined together, like that impact just because of the relationship that's being built and the depth of how we're shifting our beliefs around time. And
Yeah.
then what we do with it, of course, once we've shifted the beliefs, and then also the community piece of thing was a big part of my vision for Redeem Her Time.
Yeah, I love that because it's so important because it is about the content, right? The value that you share on the podcast. Like I said, I'm an avid listener, so I listen every week. So the content alone is amazing and deep and good and impactful. But also knowing that in addition to that content that you share, the community allows you to go deeper, allows you to get your questions answered, allows you to have that connection that sometimes you miss in podcasts, right? There's so much information out there. So I love that you also shared that sometimes listening to too many voices can be a distraction. So how
Right.
can you be intentional about saying, okay, these are the main voices that I need to be hearing from in this season. So pick those podcasts where it makes sense. If it's something that you're struggling with or you're going through or you need help with, who are those voices that you can really listen to in this season? So I love that you shared the importance of intentionality when it comes to podcasts and listening to podcasts. And I love that you said it's relationship building because it does feel
Mhm.
that way as you listen to the podcast host, whether they're doing an interview or they're speaking directly to you. You feel like you're building that relationship with them. You feel like you know them, you know their voice,
Right.
right? It's funny because I was reading scripture this morning and it says, "My sheep will know my voice," right? So
Yeah.
voice is so powerful. Knowing someone's voice, understanding, their character and how they come across is why podcasting is such a powerful platform. So I love that you shared that part as to the impact in your podcast, the relationship, the content, the community that people get when they're part of the Redeem Her Time podcast and they listen to it. So you talked about that, but I'd also love to find out what are the key takeaways that you would like people to take away from the podcast? Like whether they listen to one episode or they listen every week like I
Mhm.
do, or they binge
Mhm.
listen to several episodes. What is that one word, maybe a phrase or a key thing that no matter what episode they listen to, you want to make sure that the listeners are walking away with? What would you say that one thing is?
Well, you said it in my intro, and I say it at the outro of every single episode as we're finishing up. And it's the truth that you have time. Because
Mm,
even as believers, so many of us as women who are juggling all these different roles and responsibilities and demands and distractions in life are running around like the rest of the world saying, I don't
mm,
have time. There's not enough time. If only I had time, when I have time, if there was time, right? And
mhm,
we're always chasing time like it's this limited resource that we are lacking, and I have to get it under control because if I don't, it'll get away from me. And, now I'm like gripping it
yeah.
versus recognizing that like God lays 24 hours in front of us every single day. Like he laid manna in front of the children of Israel, right? And they had to
Hmm.
trust that what he gave them was enough, right?
Yes.
Same thing with our time. I may want 25 hours. We're recording this episode just as we're coming up to a daylight savings time change. And
Hmm.
I made a note to myself yesterday to create an email about this and maybe even something on the podcast. But so often we think, if I just had an extra hour in my day,
Hmm.
right, everything would change. Now, when it's springtime, we actually lose the hour. So it's not really like,
Hmm.
but even in the fall, when you get that extra hour, does it really change your life, right? Like I think we walk away going, we think it's about the amount of time we have, but the
It's
reality
not.
is we can't change it. Every
Yeah.
single person who ever walked the face of this earth has 24 hours a day, and nobody ever gets 5 minutes more, regardless of how much you wish for it. It's really
Hmm.
about the value, like recognizing that time and seeing
Hmm.
the value of it, seeing it as this gift from God that He has entrusted to us to
Yeah.
steward on His behalf, to invest in the context of the life and business that He's called us to in the season of life that we're in and the places where He's put us, such that
Hmm.
it produces an abundant harvest, right? Of not only
Hmm.
impact and income, but also glory for him.
Mm,
So, anyway, it all
absolutely.
starts with believing we have time because if and until we actually go, oh, I do have time, and my role is to steward this, not just try to manage it and keep it from getting away from me, then nothing's going to change. We're always going to feel like there's never enough. We're always going to feel like we're behind. So, yeah, that phrase, long story short, you have time
Yeah.
is really what it all comes down to.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true because we always hear, oh, I'm so busy. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time for that. And what you're really doing is you're busting that lie. You're
Mm.
busting that myth. You've attacked that lie from the devil, making us think that we don't have time and telling people God's truth, right? God has given us enough time in the day to be able to accomplish everything that He desires for us to accomplish in the time that He has given us. So I love that a part of your movement, your message, what you do is getting rid of that lie that's been so deeply ingrained in us, thinking that we don't have time, and really preaching the message and teaching the message and sharing the message that we do have time. You have time. So I love that. If they listen to one episode, two
They'll
episodes,
hear it every
binge on the
time.
podcast, you're going to know and understand that you have time.
I have
So, what's
listeners tell me they can hear my voice in their head. Like when that thought comes up, I don't have time or I feel behind, they just hear, you have time. Eventually, you're going to hear it in your own voice saying it to yourself, right? But it's so for now, it's okay if it's my
yeah,
voice that you hear, when that comes up in your head. But yeah,
yeah. I heard
we
someone
need that.
say that, well, not so recently, but when you were on their podcast, Carol J. Dunlop, she's like,
Yeah.
oh, yes, but I remember Lissa says I have time. So, yes, hearing your voice and hearing that you have time. I think I'd love to also share something that shifted for me that was pretty powerful that you talk about a lot too is the question that we ask ourselves is what time is it? Like, oh, what time is it? I have to rush to this. Oh, what time is it? But changing that from what time is what time is it for? Or did I
Mm.
say that right?
What is it
What
time
what is
for?
what is
Yeah.
it time for? There we go. It was such a powerful shift for me. Like, so let's talk a little bit about that because it was so impactful to me and the difference in the mindset between what time is it versus what time is it for.
What
I
is it
keep
time
messing up.
for?
What
Yeah,
is it
yeah.
time
What is it
for?
time for?
Right.
And it's so interesting
What
because those are almost like it's only one word different between the two questions.
exactly.
But there's a whole different like response. Because when you ask what time is it, immediately my
Hmm.
shoulders are like this. I'm like on heightened alert. I'm like already in like, ready to run. Like you said, either I'm already late for something or I'm behind on something or I got to get to the next thing, or it's like, let's go, let's go, let's go. What time is it? Is kind of like our
Hmm.
response, right? And I think
Hmm.
that's the way we live, like in this chronic busyness. It's just always
Mm,
rushing from one thing to the next, not really ever fully present to anything, which is part of my story. I would be somewhere
mm,
in bodily form, but my mind was way elsewhere, either what I was just doing or what I needed to do next, or the bazillion other things that are on my to-do list. And I wasn't ever really fully present, to where I
yeah.
was, whether that was with the people around me or myself or the Lord. And so, yeah, shifting that question to what is it time for? It literally makes you
Mm,
stop and slow down and go, number one, it presupposes two things. Number one, you do have time, right? What is it
mhm.
time for? I'm not focusing on lack. I am focusing on the fact that I do have time in front of me, regardless of how much I think it is, right? And it also presupposes there's a purpose for that time. What is it time for?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
now, right? Like it doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes or 5 hours, right? I'm giving attention and intention to what really matters most. And this, I think, helps with
Yeah.
distraction. It helps with multitasking, all these things. So whether we're distracting ourselves through multitasking or we're being distracted by, other things, and, a lot
Mhm.
of it still comes from inside of us, right? And so we're scattering our time and attention to all these things. Most busyness owners, as you described it back in the beginning, don't know what it's time for. I had someone tell me the other day, she's like, Lissa, I thought I had a CEO schedule. It's one of the essentials I work on with my clients, like you mentioned.
Mhm.
She's like, but I realized I had business hours, but I was literally doing business, personal, like all these random things all the time. And I wasn't really paying attention to what was it time for. And so when you
Yeah.
know what it's time for, you're going to have more focus on what it is that you are to be doing. You're going to get a lot more done in less time, make less mistakes,
Mhm.
have less stress, less overwhelm, less, all the things that we think are just normal right now in life and business.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not about
Yeah.
perfectly knowing that you're making the best CEO decision, your Christ empowered operator of your business decision with the information
Right.
you have in that moment,
Yeah.
right? Not overthinking
Yeah.
it. Like, this is what my time is supposed to go towards.
Yeah. And I think as you're talking, it's all about intentionality, right? Being intentional. And it also reminds me of what you hear a lot as mindfulness, just
Yeah.
being present in the
Presence. Yeah.
moment,
Presence is
being
the word that
mindful.
comes to my mind.
Yeah, mindful because you can be physically present, like you said, but you're not present, right?
Right.
Like you can give someone a present, but you're not present fully there with them. So it's so important to be fully present in such a distracted world. And as you were speaking, it kind of reminded me of another thing that I wanted to share about, which is a busyness owner versus a business owner. So this is something that Lissa and I talked about in our group coaching session. It came up that, I was feeling, man, I have a busyness, right? Not
Mm.
necessarily a business. And Lissa did a whole episode on it. Definitely go ahead and go to her podcast and listen to the episode on busyness and even a quiz so you can really understand what type of busyness owner you are. So let's talk a little bit about that, what it means, your kind of aha around that terminology, because I'm sure there are people who are listening that can totally relate to being a busyness owner versus a business owner. So let's go a little bit deeper into that whole concept.
Yes. Well, as you know, it was out of your mouth that word, I think I'm running a busyness, came out. And I told you, like, I wrote that down in my notes, right? We did our coaching time together, and I could not get that word out of my head. Like, even through the night, I was still thinking about what does it need? What does it mean to run a busyness, right? And I was listening to the things that you were struggling with and sharing about, and the things I heard other, women who are running businesses share about, and things like, I'm spending hours a day just trying to get my inbox, cleaned up and back to zero, or and respond back to everything that came in, or I'm sitting in all of these coffee chats, right? And, hoping that maybe someday something's going to come of all this time that I'm putting in here, or how about like I'm chasing this algorithm, right? And I'm trying to always please it, and I'm trying to always, do the thing I'm supposed to, on social to make it show people my stuff so that maybe, and it really just hit me like a busyness owner is a woman who's running around chasing an elusive algorithm, like, wasting hours on fruitless coffee chats and always, struggling to get her inbox back to zero, but
Mhm.
she's not seeing the results in her bank account.
Yeah,
None
that's
of us
true.
are in business just to check boxes and fill up time. And yet, I think as business owners, we think we're being good business owners, but really, I mean, there's a why in the middle because I think the question is, why am I doing all the things I'm doing if it's not producing results? So as a time
Mhm.
strategist, I really focus on not just where are you giving your time, but what are the results of that time invested? The roadie, I call it, right? Because you
Mhm.
can be giving a lot of time and be so consistent. You can be the most consistent person at
Mhm.
even podcasting, right? Or,
Absolutely.
social media or sending emails. But if it's never producing some kind of result,
Mhm.
then you're probably just wasting time, or there's something you need to tweak about how you're investing that time or in what way you're doing it that would, that would increase your roadie. Um, so anyway, yeah, just really like a business owner with an I in the middle is
Mhm.
always increasing in what I call the two eyes of a business, your impact and your income,
Yeah.
right? Because the income follows the impact. As you're making an impact, people are wanting to go to that next level with you. And I just shared this morning, like if and until your business name is on someone else's credit card statement, you have not served them to the deepest level that you can,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, a business owner is doing a lot of things, but should be wondering, why am I doing all this for nothing? Go get a job,
Mhm.
like if it's really not that fruitful. A business owner, a true business owner is focusing on her time and her roadie. And she's
Yeah.
getting strategic around how she approaches those two things such that it is showing up in her bank account.
Yeah. And I love that because the most transformation, I'm all about helping people to transform in their lives and in their business, is going to take place when they actually have the most impact, which, like you said, is when they've invested time, invested money, invested energy. So if people aren't investing time, money, and energy in your programs and the things that you're offering, you're not making the biggest impact. You're not giving them the transformation that they need. So you really have to share with them on a level of sales so that they can, invest and spend their time and energy to get the results that they need to get through the programs that you offer, the services that you offer. So it's so good. I love that discussion about the difference between busyness and business. So I love that. So we've talked about a few key things, and I know we could hear a lot more because I could probably bring up some other things. I could talk about fill in refills and pour outs and all that good stuff. But I do want people to have the opportunity to hear more on your podcast. So, what's the best way for people to listen to the podcast?
Yes, I want to share that. And then I do have one other thing that came to my mind. I just want to say that might be somebody needs to hear. The best way to listen, I mean, Redeem Her Time is on every podcast platform. So you can go find it. I always say when you find a good one, follow it, right? Because then
Mhm.
when their consistent episodes are coming out, you're really you're in this growth cycle. Sometimes you just hear one episode and you're inspired by somebody, but
Mhm.
are you really growing?
Yep.
Versus this is someplace I'm going to invest some time and put down some roots. And it may be for a season. It may be where you feel like I really need, to learn about like podcasting. So you're listening to this series right now, or I really need to learn about time. So you're listening to mine. You really learn about, maybe you need to focus on your health. So you listen to,
Yep.
health related podcasts. But anyway, yeah, I encourage you, don't give something just a one and done because I don't think you're selling yourself short.
Yep.
Because the purpose of a podcast is that longer term growth over time. Right.
Mhm.
And I think as podcast hosts, we understand that. And this is what I would say is, if you either have a podcast or you're considering a podcast, like think about how that return on time invested, that roadie compares to other things that you're doing. For
Mm.
example, I recently did the stats, right? They say that the algorithm shows your Facebook posts to, on a good day, 1 to 3% of your audience. So take your
Mhm.
number of followers, figure out 1 to 3%. That's how many people are even being shown it. That doesn't mean they're
Yeah.
stopping long enough to actually read it and then even do something about it. So, okay, let's be honest, it's going to be less than 1% that actually are moved by it. But a podcast, like 100% of the people who follow your podcast get to decide themselves if they want to listen to it. Right. And as a podcaster, who is putting things out there that are going to live on forever, I can refer back to podcasts all the time. I'll be like, hey, go back and listen to
Mhm.
episode 303 or whatever, and drive people back to something that's always living there. So I can't speak highly enough. Whether it's you as a listener and you're just want to grow, like they say that the people who listen to podcasts are actually more successful because they are ready for growth. They are ready to learn and they're not just looking for the quick 7-second thing to move on to the
Yeah.
dancing cat videos, right? Like they're willing to sit through a 20, 30, 40 minute, conversation, sometimes on double speed. I'll be honest. I listen to a lot of things on 1.5 or double speed, depending on who it is, and I'll have it in while I'm cleaning or driving or whatever. So anyway, I just wanted to say that as a time strategist, podcasting is a really good roadie, and a really good strategy to be using. So yeah,
Yeah.
we talk
I
all about
definitely
faith and life
agree.
and business and time and roadie on the Redeemer Time podcast. So
Yeah, I definitely agree because sometimes when I look at the stats, it could be an episode from like a year ago or 2 years ago, and someone's listening, or there's several listens on that episode. So it's like, it really is a great return on your investment to know that you recorded something 2 years ago and someone is listening to it now and being impacted by it and getting influenced by it. It's definitely worth your time and effort to be able to do that. So I love that you brought that up for sure. So, if someone is interested in learning a little bit more about you, the work that you do, share a little bit about how you help. As I mentioned, I'm working with Lissa. I'm in her coaching program. So I definitely will recommend it. It has shifted a lot of things for me in my productivity and, how I approach life and business. So I definitely recommend it, but I'd love for people to learn a little bit more about the work that you do and then how they connect with you. What is the best way for them to
Yeah.
connect with you?
So I always send people first to the podcast because, again, if you're listening here, then you're probably someone who's looking to grow. And so that would be a great place to go. The next thing I would say is the Redeem Her Time Planner, which Nadine has talked about. I really put a lot of thought and intention into the tools that are in here. So it's not like what you get at Target where you're just picking a pretty cover and, oh, I like this layout. And so this is the one I'm going to use for the year. Like it's very intentional around
Yeah.
your beliefs around time, your role around time, your question around time, and then how you're taking these bigger vision pictures and breaking it down into what do I do on a quarterly basis, a monthly basis, a weekly basis, a daily basis, right? And then how do I go back and reevaluate? Like one of the questions each week is, what will I make time for this week? Right. So that's a
Mhm.
CEO intention at the beginning of the week. And then at the end is a CEO reflection. What did I treasure with my time this week? Right.
Yeah.
So like it's getting you to think about your time before you just jump into the next week and just keep filling it the same way you always do and get the same results, which they say is insanity. So anyway, the Redeem Her Time Planner is a great thing. The link is on the podcast show notes or on the Redeem Her Time website. And then I do have a coaching program for people who are business owners. I mean, the planner can be, you don't have to have a business to use the planner. The coaching program is specifically for women in business where we go, okay, we understand not only is our time entrusted to us, so is our business. How do I approach this not as a busyness owner, but as a business owner, as a CEO, right? A Christ
Yep.
empowered operator of this business. And I believe that we have to have the four CEO essentials. So CEO time stewardship, which is how I think about my time and approach it with
Mm.
God, right? From a biblical perspective. My CEO schedules, where I do have a plan for what it's time for, and I know what my week looks like before it even starts. Hello. Our CEO systems, where we are streamlining and we're taking those tasks that feel random that are actually reoccurring. And we create a really simple CEO hub so that we have one landing place where everything goes from. And we have a very, we're not wasting time reinventing the wheel. And then CEO strategies, where we're not just like heads down working in our business.
Mhm.
We're like big picture working on our business and doing some of the deeper, like how growth focused projects and making time for that instead of always saying there's not enough time. And it is a full year program because there are different seasons of life. There are different seasons of our business throughout the year. I think there's different seasons of growth as we grow through one thing, then we're working on the next thing. So we build out those CEO essentials in the first 8 weeks, but then you've got a full year of support as you're really testing, tweaking, troubleshooting, applying, scaling, all of these things. And as you found, the community is such the value in there as well, because you get around other like-minded, like-hearted CEOs who also want to be faithful and fruitful with their time and their business. And we have amazing conversations around what God's teaching us, around strategies that we're trying, where we're focusing our time, where we're not. Our
Yep.
digital fast is happening, where we're trying to give less of our time to a device that likes to, take a lot of it. So
Mhm.
yeah, so that's, if you're interested in that, you can definitely reach out to me. I'm happy to do what I call a CEO time audit. Where you take a look at where is your time going? What is your
Yeah.
roadie? Are you a business owner? And if so, how can we start getting the CEO essentials in place for you?
Absolutely. And the best time for them, the best place for them to connect, whether it's the podcast, whether it's your program, whether it's the planner, is the website, right?
Yes, yes.
redeemhertime.com. So go to redeemhertime.com to connect to listen to the podcast and get that planner as a resource. And definitely, if you want to go deeper and make the most impact, working with Lissa in the program is key. So thank you, Lissa. This has been an awesome conversation. I always love chatting with you and all of the wisdom that you bring to the table and the wisdom that you share. So thank you so much for being a part of this season of the Women Faith Plus Business podcast.
Thank you so much, Nadine.
Are you a woman of faith in business who is aspiring to start a podcast, or maybe you have a podcast and you want to rebrand or relaunch your podcast? I have good news for you. Announcing and introducing She Elevates Media. She Elevates Media is a collective and a collaboration project and your marketing team to launch your podcast. We will assist you from beginning to end in launching your God-given message in the marketplace in the form of a podcast. We help you plan the podcast, we help you publish and produce the podcast, and we also help you promote the podcast. So this is something that is new to the marketplace, and I am one of the individuals as a part of the collective of your marketing team. So I encourage you to go to sheelevatesmedia.com to learn more about how we can partner with you to launch your podcast, to rebrand your podcast, or to relaunch your podcast as we walk you through the path to profiting in your podcast, where we plan, we publish, we produce, and we promote your podcast. Learn more at sheelevatesmedia.com. Thank you for listening to the Women Faith Plus Business podcast. I hope this episode has been insightful and inspiring and has offered you an opportunity to take action to transform your life and your business. Wherever you are listening, be sure to rate and review the podcast and also subscribe to get the next episode right in your inbox by going to womenfaithandbusiness.com to join our email list.